In a world filled with challenges and opportunities, it's not just about having big dreams, it's about having the right approach to turn those dreams into reality. Whether you're navigating the competitive landscape of business or seeking personal growth, it's all about the approach.
Welcome, everybody, to our next episode of The Approach. I have been looking forward to this episode for quite some time. My guest today is Rob Caine. He is a renowned motivational speaker and coach specializing in leadership and decision-making, high performance under pressure, which, given his background, he has that area covered. Talks about mental health and communication. His insight comes from 30 years as a fighter pilot and senior officer in the UK Royal Air Force, and he just recently took on the position of Air Commodore over training. With a wealth of experience and positive, emphatic approach, Rob has made significant changes in how individuals and businesses operate. So without further ado, let's welcome Rob to the stage.
Hey, good evening, Doc, or good morning.
Good. Yeah, it's actually it's 2:00 in the afternoon here. So, yeah. So you're coming to us from the UK. So
yeah, that's right. And a beautiful evening.
Yeah. So I'll go through your bio, and we've talked a little bit about, but let's hear from you, who you are, and what you're trying to do.
Rob, basically my call sign is terrible for an American audience. We do a lot of nicknames in the Air Force, so I'm Puppy because I'm very enthusiastic about what I do. But I'm nearing my 50s, so maybe it's a little bit wrong as a call sign. However, I've been a Tornado and Hawk fighter pilot and a commanding officer over about 30 years. I'm now the head of UK military flying training in the UK for the UK Royal Air Force, Royal Navy and the Army Air Corps. And also I'm developing my own coaching and consultancy company because in both careers, I really just want to make a difference and help people with what they're doing, empower them and try and make things better.
Yeah, that's absolutely outstanding. And to have that kind of experience and background, you've got this a whole different perspective that you can bring to an audience and that you can bring to people to be able to connect with them and to be able to share it and have that example background of being such a high performer. So do you want to kind of share how you got into, how you got into that and both fields actually, because you have the pilot and then you have the consulting as well. So kind of share with us how you got into both of those.
Yeah, I think the main thing was, like many people, I was like 11 years old. And when you went to school, they said, what do you want to be? And said, I want to be a sports person. I want to go into business. A lot of young kids would go, I want to be a fighter pilot. And the teacher goes, yeah, well done. And you move along and everyone grows up. And I didn't grow up. In fact, there's a phrase, you can't grow up and be a fighter pilot. And it's 100% true. My wife will tell you that one day I'm going to have to get a real job for a living. But I was really lucky. I managed to get some reasonable qualifications, get into the Air Force. And I basically went through training, high points and low points through training. But I learned a lot. Had a great team of people around me who helped me along the way, and then got onto the front line, did loads of tours of operations on the Tornado, which is an amazing aircraft. It's similar to your F-15, where you're flying with a navigator in the boot or now a weapons system operator. Yeah. And that teaches you a lot. Did some weapons instructor and electronic warfare type stuff, instructing on that jet, and then went into attack weapons training. So teaching people how to do dogfighting and weaponry and that kind of thing, which obviously is just great fun, turning and burning. I call it a 3D chess game at 1,000 miles an hour. It's really good fun, and we'll probably bend some of that stuff later. Yeah. And then as I went through the ranks, becoming a commanding officer, and then later in this role now, running operations, things like when we did the withdrawal from Afghanistan, I was one of the people who helped on op pitting, which is our version of the withdrawal, where we helped, say, 15,000 people from HKIA in Afghanistan. That was very rewarding to be part of that team, helping out with that. But obviously, that gives you insights. And as we started teaching fighter pilot training better, a lot of it was not about training their hands anymore to fly a jet. It was training their brain. and we call it cognitive fighter pilot training. And that involves psychology and coaching. And I found that incredibly interesting. So we became, instead of just instructors, we became coaches, and like professionally qualified coaches. So now I've developed that into a wider coaching era, and I'm just trying to expand that because then essentially my leadership at work and my coaching in my business are very complementary, and I find great energy from both.
Yeah. So just curious question, because people have this perception about pilots, and they've seen the movies with Top Gun and stuff here in the U.S. And so there's that perception of I guess cockiness, but could be misconstrued, and it's actually confidence. What's your experience as far as the type of pilots that you've trained and that you've worked with?
I think the phrase I would use, and it's right across the military because you've got army background as well, and it's the same across police forces. I think it's ordinary people doing extraordinary things because we're trained to do extraordinary things. So most people in those worlds are pretty down to earth. They're not really that arrogant or cocky because the team won't allow that to happen. You've got to work as a team, from the cleaner right the way up to the astronaut. It's the same thing for us with engineers. You have to be part of a team because you're just one part of that system. So most of the people I work with are not arrogant at all. I think the one thing that can come across is we can be quite punchy. We can be quite direct, and sometimes it's because we speak fast. It can come across wrong. I think the analogy I would give to people is everyone knows doing like driving tests when they're learning how to drive. And imagine doing that for about 5 or 6 or 7 years, and you're doing 2 driving tests. In fact, you're doing an advanced driving test every day, every working day for 7 years, and really focused debriefs. Well, you end up being quite resilient because you have to be really open to learning. And I think that means that you end up with a way of being that sometimes people can come across as arrogant, but it genuinely isn't.
My experience, because when I got out of the service, the military itself has its own culture, and then you have a culture within each of the branches that are there, and then even within our own departments and job skills, we kind of have our own culture there. But when you get out into the civilian world and you start having to work with people that are not used to that structure, not used to that order, and definitely not used to that directness, I had to learn to communicate a little bit better because people didn't quite handle that directness. And so I had to learn to soften my approach a little bit when I talk to the civilian world. So
I think that's part of why coaching is so interesting to me, because it forces me to slow down what I'm saying and to listen more. And that's a great skill in the military, and it's a great skill outside the military. So I'm finding it really, really positive for me.
Good. So the whole premise of our show is called The Approach, and so with my background, it was everything revolved around our approach, or how we're going to approach a mission, how we're going to approach somebody that we need to get information from, and so what is something that you feel like, whether it's on the military side or just your consulting side, whichever direction you want to take it, or both, is something that you feel is unique, that would be different from what anybody else has to deal with, that requires a specific approach for you to be able to deal with?
So I think something that comes across in the world of being in a cockpit on your own, sometimes in a really alien environment where your brain turns to mush when you put your helmet on and you're upside down pulling 9G or whatever it might be, you have to give yourself the best chance to use the small capacity in your human brain to work. And we do that through a certain approach. And I think that approach is based really, really heavily on a number of things, and I'll unpack those slightly. The first one, I think, would be you have to go through the stages, and that takes years and years. So we do an approach where every stage of training you have to double the speed and double the complexity. You can't go straight into an F-35 and expect to be really good at it.
Yeah.
But if you go through the stages, you can get to that.
Yeah.
But even when you've got to that point where you're pretty competent, one of the things that I think is pretty unique to the military and helps in fast jet aviation is the understanding of the mission. So when I think if you underline everything we did, it's preparation, preparation, preparation. But one of the things that I really loved was this idea called the 4 T's and time. We would focus on task, target, threat, tactics, and then underlying it all the time was how much time you had to achieve that.
Yeah.
And what we're really doing, if you equated it to business, it might be like a business plan. If you equated it to the army, it might be campaign planning. But I think the 4 T's and time was something that allowed you to compress a huge amount of problems into a mission plan, so that when you sat in that cockpit and you strapped on that multi-million-pound aircraft, working with a team of people all around you in different jets with engineers, everybody knew what they were trying to achieve, what their commander was trying to achieve, what their commander was trying to achieve. So the intent of the mission. We also knew exactly what strategy and risk we were going to be taking on board that day. And everybody knew the tactics, techniques, and procedures that we were going to employ in various different scenarios. So in other words, everybody knew what the playbook was. So that build up, that campaign planning and the 4 T's, I think is a really good way of allowing ourselves to then operate and be successful under a high degree of pressure. And actually when your brain isn't able to function as normal because you're in a different alien environment. So I think that's a really key part of how we prepare fighter pilots to really get the best out of their mission.
Yeah. So when you do your consulting, how do you have a specific way that you translate that over into your consulting side when you're working with people?
Yeah, I think it's because I'll often say to business people, what's your end state? Like what's the thing you want to achieve? And a lot of them will have an answer about that, but not a really clear one, not one that they've thought through all the variables for, not a clear vision. And I think having clarity as a leader, or clarity as a business person, or clarity as a fighter pilot, it's all the same thing. But often we don't spend the time to really focus on the end state. And part of that 4 T's and time, that campaign planning, is going, what's my intent? What do I want to do? And then coming up with things like Simon Sinek's, well, why? What's the 5 whys that makes that valid? And I think those things help me with business when we start off, because without that, there's no other element. Everything else is just going to be activity. Yeah. There's a brilliant book by Dr. Elia Gulrat called The Goal. And it's all about, okay, how do I make things more effective and efficient? And we all do it every day in people's lives, whether it's in business or in the military or in everywhere we go. We often do a lot of activity that's not contributing to that end state, not contributing to that goal. Yeah. So when I'm at work or whether I'm coaching, I'm always trying to focus people to make things better, but only towards the goal. There's an approach that you say, how do I make the boat go faster? No. And it's really important. You've got to focus on something that's going to contribute every day to making that boat go faster and end up towards the goal. And that's what I try and work with people, either personally or with their businesses. Yeah.
So one of the things that I go over with people, because we're kind of in that same background working with businesses and business owners. And one of the things that I talk with them about along the lines of what you're talking about is we talk about what is non-critical and energy draining, what is non-critical and energizing, and then what is critical and energy draining, and then critical and energizing. So I break it up into those 4 categories. And then we talk about the different things that they do that are either contributing toward working towards their goal, and it's time consuming, or do we have things that we could eliminate out of that? So with what you're talking about, how does do you have something similar that you present or talk to people about as far as when you're trying to work with them and help them get towards their goals?
Yeah, I've used the same quadrant system in a slightly different way about importance and effectiveness. But the one I really like is an equation about what your performance is. And your performance is your potential minus interferences. And often what I'm trying to do is help people with the interferences. Because if you get rid of those frictions, the things that are energy draining, the things that are difficult to do but should be made easier, you end up with your performance and your potential that are much more married up. And people can be really busy without actually doing a lot. And so what we're trying to do is get the most out of their performance. And that it doesn't matter what your performance actually is, but we're trying to maximize someone's performance in exactly the same way you were talking about there in terms of recognizing what is important. And I really like that idea of the quadrants. It's something I use quite regularly.
Yeah. So it goes back to when we were in school and they tried to teach us about Venn diagrams.
100%. Yeah.
Might trigger some people with that. But my next question is we get into leadership and we talk about approaches to leadership. And obviously with your situation, it's unique as far as the job skill and the people that you work with in that job skill. So what is your approach of leadership and how you've been effective working with such high performers?
I think the thing I've learned mainly through failure, when I have got it wrong, is to be yourself. So when we go through our officer college, it's at Royal Air Force Cranwell in Lincolnshire, we have some great instructors and trainers there. And I remember they used this phrase, leadership is you with bells on. And I was like, what does that mean? But essentially it has to be authentic. It has to be you. You can fake it a little bit and you can be someone you're not, but you can't consistently do that. I think that's a big part of my approach that I've learned now is just to be myself. But in the same way is when you come to work and you might have something in your mind slightly, you can be open about having normal life problems, but you've got to be positive and you've got to have a way of inspiring people. So for example, I know that when I go to work and I was running a squadron of maybe 150 people, if I came into work and I didn't even think I had a bad frown on my face, everybody ended up having a bad frown on their face by the end of the morning. And I was like, I don't think I've told everyone that, because people pick up on what you're doing. So as a leader, I always try and be me, but with bells on, so that I can be authentically positive and inspire people as I go. Yeah. I think one of the approaches that I really like is to keep it simple and be a pragmatist. So you can talk about stuff all day, but if it's not going to work in the real world, then I don't always find that very useful. So I like to translate strategy into deliverable tasks. And I think that really helps people come with you on a journey because they can see progress along that way to the goal. And I think that's really important. I also use 3 words. When I was director of ops during the Afghanistan thing, you've got to bring people with you. And I hate toxic environments that they're not very efficient and everybody hates coming to work. Yeah. If you come to work, there are high performance teams that are run by fear. There are, and they can be very successful, but they don't tend to be very sustainable. So what I always try and do is build a really successful team that want to come to work, because you tend to get the most out of people. So I call it's really simple. It's proactive, collegiate, and helpful. So why proactive? Well, the military is full of people who love, and business is the same. People love catching balls all day. It's full of adrenaline and dopamine, and it feels great when you're getting it right, but hell, you're busy. Whereas if you're proactive and you can see things happening a little bit in advance, you plan really well, you delegate really well, you use mission command really well, you trust your people, well, then actually it starts becoming a lot easier. And I juggle as a way of dealing with stress. I've done it for years, and I hardly ever try and catch a ball. It's the throw is really consistent, so that when I catch the ball, I know I'm basically moving my hand half an inch. I'm not really even thinking about it. In fact, when I was really good, I could juggle for about 2 minutes with my eyes closed because it was just really good. I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
Same approach in the military. Can we end up in a proactive way? Collegiate is within your team. So if you can't be helping each other out in your team, you're in trouble. That's obvious. But the helpful bit is the outside of your team. So if someone phones you up and they've got nothing to do with your business, don't just put the phone down. Say, can I help? And if you can even just guide them in that direction that's going to help them, that's good. So your team becomes known for adding value. And I think adding value for the right reasons is really important. And it ends up with a virtuous improvement in performance. And actually, everyone starts having fun. And having a little bit of fun, I really like the Marines. So our Royal Marines have a thing in their way of being, which is cheerfulness. They actually put it into their values. So it's cheerfulness under pressure. And I think having some fun while you're under pressure, being shot at, I've done it, is really important. And I think that is a really great environment to be around, and you get a lot more out of people.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was in the service, we had done some field exercises, and we're doing some cross training internationally, and we had some Marines that came in from Great Britain to train with us, and we're in the middle of a training scenario, and all of a sudden they just sit down in the middle of the road, and they started breaking out tea. I was like, guys, we've got a mission we're running. They go, it's tea time.
And it's silly, right? It's like completely silly, but it's brilliant, absolutely awesome.
Yeah, but it was interesting because it was like, it was so out of the ordinary from what we're used to, but it was interesting because it kind of broke up some of the seriousness and the stress that we were undergoing at the time. It was so awesome. So I've encountered this with some of the people, both in my work experience, working for people, and then working with people. You tend to come across leaders that or business owners or managers or whatever you want to call it, that they want high performers. They say that they want movers and shakers coming in, and then when they get them in there, then they want to put their thumb on them and then control them. Instead of allowing them to do what you've hired them to do, and I have seen that just demoralize an entire organization, and then they wonder why they can't keep effective people and keep movers and shakers under their employment. So in your experience, have you seen those scenarios, when it's been out of your control, and how did you handle that?
I think I've found it quite interesting to start with, where I've seen leaders who were leading with slightly more didactic fear approaches, and we ended up with like very efficient, very effective units, but people were worried about failure. And I think that was the big problem with it, is in all life, you're going to have error and you're going to have failure. And if you're in those organizations, the way I would describe them is they're quite brittle. Mm-hmm. It's a bit like an iron bar. You can bend it, but eventually it's going to break. Even though it's quite tough, it's going to break eventually. Whereas I think I realized quite early on that what you wanted to do was a more flexible approach. Yep. So how did I deal with it with people who were, maybe not that great for me? I think I learned a lot from them. I kind of tried to listen and go, that's what I'm not going to do. And I found that really useful. I think also the acme of skill, I think, if you talk about Sun Tzu and people like that, is not ending up in a fight. Because I think Colin Powell said the problem with dying in a ditch is you're dead in a ditch. So the acme of skill is trying to win the argument and play a bit of chess, so that you're not just dead in the ditch. You've got to work with that and make that individual get to the right point through good argument, Socratic questioning, building the team with you, working as a team. But it's not easy sometimes. I think the bit I'm really pleased and proud about is that I see better leaders now right across the gambit, people who take a more coaching approach, because I think they've seen some of those worst approaches. And like me, you learn a lot from the worst leaders. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the approaches this is not new stuff that I absolutely love, was Eisenhower, and I write it in my diary every year.
Yeah.
And I'll probably mash the quote, but essentially he says leadership is nothing more than taking responsibility for everything that goes wrong, and giving your subordinates credit for everything that goes well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I 100% believe that. So when you're giving mission command, allowing those high performers to perform, well, when it goes wrong, you've allowed them to do that. You take responsibility for that. Yeah. But when it goes right, that's their successes, and that shines around you. And I really like that approach. But I've learned it from the opposite way of doing business.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the things in fighter pilot training is we realize you've got to learn in 4 different ways. Actually, there's lots more. But the key part of that is experiential learning via experience. We could talk about it all day in a book or in a podcast.
Yeah.
But you've got to learn through experience sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've seen instances where people that are in a position of leadership took credit, that did the exact opposite of what you just described. And I had been even on the receiving end of some of that and have observed quite a bit of it from my own learning experience, and saw them take credit for other people's work and then blamed others when things didn't go right. So it's exactly the opposite of what you were describing. It convinced me very early on that I did not want to be that way as well.
Yeah, it has a profound effect on people. And there's nothing more that I like as a leader and or a coach when someone who works for me outperforms me and rises through the ranks faster than me or performs better than me. Yeah. I mean, that's like, I've had a part of that. That's amazing. There's a student of mine on the Tornado. So I'd already been on the front line for like 3 years. And I was his flight commander instructing on the Tornado. He is now at a higher rank and further on in the Air Force than I am. And he's absolutely brilliant. And I'm so proud of having a part in that guy's journey. So why wouldn't you take that approach? Because everybody in the room can see it when you're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely wonderful to be able to see the lights come on with somebody that you've been working with and developing, and has that talent and has that ability to be able to excel. And you take yourself out of out of the scenario and make it more about them and their development. And to me, that's extremely rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, it's when someone comes up with an amazing idea or does something that you'd never ever come up with, and you're like, that is brilliant. How did you come up with that? It's so exciting to allow people to do that. And David Arquette talks about it in Turn the Ship Around, where he's allowing 100 or so people to do that. Imagine what 100 brains can do instead of just your one brain. It's a really obvious statement. Yeah,
it's interesting because you could even overlap that into other areas, such as parenting. One of my kids asked me one day, they said, "Dad, what if I ever, outrank you, or, I beat some of your records because I was a competitive power lifter?" And I said, "That's what I want for you. I want you to be better than me.
Yeah,
we should improve for the next generation." And, it kind of blew my kid's hair back when I said that, but that's truly how I feel about it. And I want other leaders to feel that way.
Yeah. I was born in South Africa, but my mum and dad were just working out there. But the Zulus have a phrase called Ubuntu. And I think there's a few sporting sides in America, like the Celtics have used it in basketball.
Yeah.
But essentially this idea that we're all good together. I'm good because you're good. We're going to be successful because we're going to be successful together. Yeah. And the heights you'll get to together are far higher that you will get to collectively than if you are on your own, even if you're being as vicious and backstabbing as people can be. Mm-hmm. I really love that idea of building up together.
Yeah. It goes, I was a high school football coach for a while. And, that was one of the things that we would focus on trying to tell our players, is that focus on your job, because they would say, well, this person's not doing don't worry about that person. You do your job, because if you're trying to do their job, you're not doing your job. And then the whole system breaks down. And then
100%.
We'll address the one that's not doing their job. You focus on your job. And if everybody does what they're supposed to do every play, we'll win in the end.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So, what are some of the problem areas that you've run into in your journey, and how did you work towards, what was your approach towards solving those problems?
I think one that I've really seen improve how we do business is going back to that honesty. Taking an honest, open, and transparent approach sounds really obvious, right? It sounds really obvious. But when you're, say, flying in a dogfight with 2 or 3 other guys, and we make errors all the time, you know, the art of fighting is generally who makes the least errors, not who makes the most fantastic plays. Same in most sports. And because you go to a debrief, you end up with everyone saying, well, you got this wrong, well, you got that wrong, you need to do this better. And it's all open, honest, and transparent. Yeah. But I think 30, 40 years ago, that didn't happen. And we would probably lose a fast jet every month. I certainly lost a lot of friends going through training because it's not that we did things in a bad way. I think we thought we were doing things really well. But to have a really good, engaged safety culture and risk management culture, both on operations and at home, you need to be really honest. So it's like if you're the boss and you made an error, you have to own up about it. And I think maybe 30, 40 years ago, that might have been a little bit glossed over, whereas I don't think it ever is now. It's really important that we take that. And why does that help? It's because when you're dealing with a problem, whether you're a CEO or a fighter pilot, or a senior officer or a parent, I think it's really good if you can be open, honest, transparent. The problems become more obvious to deal with. But it's also that when you're dealing with that problems, you can bring in loads of experts to try and help you, engineers, data analysts, you name it, a sort of real NASA approach. And because no one's trying to hide anything, there's no politics involved, because you've got this psychological safety that everyone knows they're here to help and contribute towards the goal, you end up in a world where people can talk openly about the solutions. And as a result, we can very quickly blend and fuse all those great ideas together. Understand the timeline, that's really important. Understand how much time you've got to work with and what decisions you've got to make. But then you can genuinely take that forward. If you're just trying to do it all on your own and hide some stuff, then you're going to be found out eventually. So I think that open, honest, transparent approach, a team approach, and getting the experts in and trusting them is a really good way to solve problems on a massive scale. And I've had that from engineering problems when I was managing a flying training school to operations like our pitting. And I think that's a really clear way of how sometimes I think our management approach and leadership approach has changed.
So if you were working with someone and you needed to help them distinguish between ego versus, confidence and intentionality, how would you help them through that process?
I think one of the first things that I try and do, both as a leader and a coach, is build up a rapport. So really trying to understand someone. And I really like some psychological tools just to frame people's awareness, because not everyone has a really high EQ or self-awareness. So I think sometimes working through, loads of people like different things. So whether it's an SDI, strengths inventory, or whether it's MBTI, Myers-Briggs, 16 personalities type work, or it's a whole range. I really like the Table Group, Patrick Lencioni's stuff on Working Genius. I think that's brilliant as well. So starting with those kind of tools, but also good conversations, means that you can start shining a light back on people, providing a mirror almost, to go, right, where do you think your strengths and weaknesses are before we start? Because a lot of Sir John Whitmore's approach to coaching was built around the GROW model, where you start with a problem. But first of all, you've got to explore what the problem is. And sometimes it's us, often it's us. And I think mindset and your approach, going back to the title of your show, is so important. It's literally the starting point and the end point. So I think just getting to know people and asking them to coach themselves sometimes on their own mindset and their own approach. It's really interesting. So I think that's where I would start with.
It's been interesting because there's been some business owners, and I've worked with leaders within an organization that they had a perception of what the problem was, but their perception of what the problem was not what everybody else perceived was the problem.
Oh, yeah.
So have you encountered that?
Yeah, I'll use a simple one. This was the idea of someone who wanted to do more phys, so wanted to get fitter. And so they come with the problem of, I'm really finding it hard to find time in my busy job to get fitter. And that seems really straightforward. It's really easy. You go, okay, of course, yeah. But actually, when we started burying down into that problem set, is the reason he wanted to get fitter was not because of physical elements. He actually wanted to spend more time with his friends. And it was actually because of how he felt. Yeah. And so spending time in the gym or playing squash or going out and playing a game of golf was his way of spending time with his friends. So the problem set that he came with, that he showed up with, was one about physical fitness. But that was not the underlying problem. Yeah. And so it's trying to use really good questioning and listening twice as much as talking to find out what that problem set starts with. And that can take some time, but I think as I've learned more about coaching, is the more time you spend on that problem or that goal at the beginning, the more you can help people.
Yeah, that's one of the areas that I delve into, and we talk about intentionality and how adversity impacts your intentionality. Because sometimes people, when they encounter problems, they actually project out more and they incorporate more people in. And then you have those that withdraw, and then it becomes more of a self-preservation type mentality. Yeah. And so, trying to work people through those scenarios. So how would you work with somebody that has that tendency to dive straight into self-preservation and take that approach to their intentionality?
I think sometimes it's, I think it's an approach that I've looked at from flying, where you talk about your preparation and what you want to achieve, and then you use debriefing to look at what you did. Yeah. It's almost like engineers would call it a systems approach to engineering. Don't judge something by what label it's got on it. Judge by what it acts like. Yeah. And that's what it is. Some people call it left page, right page thinking. There's a brilliant coach in the UK called Charlie Unwin, who's an Olympic coach. He calls it left page, right page. So in other words, you allow that person to set out their intent, and then you use holding to account, really good, honest debriefing. And it has to be kind and it has to be honest, but it sometimes can be a little bit direct, because you're in a safe psychological space together, that you can look at the right page. Well, what did you do? And I think that's one way of just helping people, because everybody needs a little bit of help on their leadership journey or whatever focus they've got, whether that's mental health or well-being. Everybody needs that help. And that's part of, I think, what great coaching does, is it's a structure to help people achieve their potential. Everybody needs it. I've been coached, I'm sure you have. Even when you're a coach, you need a coach. Roger Federer is probably one of the best tennis players the world has ever seen. Yeah. He had a coach. In fact, he probably had several coaches. Yeah. And why do I end up with those people being so successful? It's because it helps.
Yeah. So there's two different approaches that I've seen with when people start developing their plan. And one approach that I've seen is that they have the plan, they have the scheme. These are the positions that we need to fill, and they find people to fill those positions to get to the goal. And then I've seen others that they work with what they've got, and then they may have one high performer, but then they turn around and build the scheme around that high performer. Have you experienced that in any of your, especially on the pilot side, where people develop schemes around an individual rather than building people into the scheme?
Yeah, I think the system you just described there is more the military, because you can't choose who's going to come in your unit. So I think on a fighter squadron, for example, we always say you're only as good as the weakest part of that squadron. For obvious reasons. It's the same in infantry or with a tank platoon or whatever it might be. Yeah. So everybody has to be strong. So I think it took us our responsibility to make that person as good as they possibly can be, so that your unit can be as good as it possibly can be. I think what you're talking about with the previous one, which is where a lot of businesses can pick and choose. If you're in a high performance sports team, you have that luxury to pick and choose people, and if they're not reaching the right standard. But I think I love the idea of the long win. So in both models, I think if you are just trading people in and out, or even in the military going, you've not met the standard, you're out, that short-term approach, yeah, people see that and ends up with a divisive part of pressure. Mm-hmm. Whereas if people know you're going to support them and try and help them, yeah, then you take a longer term approach. So building teams that are going to be successful, whether you're hiring in or whether you're working from the bottom up, yeah, you're managing to get everybody to the best place they can be. And that might be helping coach them to a place where they're better. And that might be outside the business. But it also, you're helping them get to where they need to be next. Mm-hmm. And if everybody sees the leaders, and you've got leaders at every level doing that, the All Blacks, the rugby team, there's a great book called Legacy about their approach, where everyone's a mentor to everybody else when people come into the team. Yeah. That is a great approach. And what does that long win look like for the All Blacks? It looks like 30, 40 years of world domination. They're not always the top one, but they're probably almost the top three. And in a world of high performance like that, that is scarily good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all about the culture that you establish, and then holding tight to that culture, and then having people conform to that culture when they come in. Yeah. It's I've seen teams where they've had that culture, and then every once in a while they get that one person that just will not adapt to the culture, and they can actually become very, very toxic. So yeah, if you've had that scenario, those people, you have to make one decision. Either you have to sit down with them and talk them through it and get them on board, or make the decision to move them out. So what is an approach that you have, or that you've had to use to address those kind of individuals?
I'll be honest, I think sometimes as a leader, we shy away from those too often. And I think everyone knows that time where they should have said something and they probably let it slide. I think the Air Force has this idea of the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. But I think the bit I've learned, and actually really recently in terms of really framing it in my mind, is Patrick Lencioni's The Table Group, another American, is they talk about a naked approach, which I think is really powerful. So in other words, you're really honest. Yeah. So if you see something, you don't have to be horrible about it. You can be kind, but really honest, where you say, what, that behavior is not acceptable. Yeah. And that if you continue doing that behavior, then I don't think it's right. You're not displaying the values that are absolutely vital to my company. So for the Air Force, is the values of respect, integrity, service, and excellence. And we should use those values to hold people to account. So if you're being disrespectful, if you're not going for excellence, if you're not doing it for service, you don't have integrity, well, then you need to go to another organization. Your values might fit really nicely in another organization, but having those honest approaches, kindly and fairly, is the way I found to deal with it. It's still not easy, but it's the best way to do things. And actually earlier having that conversation saves a whole bunch of chaos around you as you go.
Yeah. Kind of going back to what you were talking about before, and kind of relating it to the individuals that we're talking about, when people come in, our goal should be to set them up for success. Yeah. And you could very easily turn around and set somebody up for failure, in the same breath. And I've seen they call it a corporate approach, but they'll take those individuals and then they start putting them in situations to fail. And so if you were working with a company that they have that approach in place, what advice would you give them?
Well, first of all, get a good lawyer, because you're going to end up with a constructive dismissal case.
Yeah.
Likewise, start looking for another job, because your company's not going to be there in 5 years.
Yeah.
So the world is littered with companies. Even at the top 100 companies from 100 years ago, there's only about 5 or 6 still left. And that's because the world is dynamic, but also because when you take those approaches, you are going to end up with a culture where it will not be successful long term. It might be successful in the short term, and we've all seen companies like that, but they will fold because they don't have the right values.
Yeah.
So I could give them example after example of where that is going to end up in failure. So again, it's being honest and trying to say the best way to deliver service to mankind and make the world better is by doing the right thing. And by the way, if you do the right thing, you're going to add value, and people are going to pay you for it. And if they add value on a consistent basis, and you always have an open mindset to learning, you're going to make more money over a long time.
Yeah.
Or be more successful as a sports person, or as a fighter pilot, or as an infantryman, or whatever it might be. And I think that's a much better approach. And even if you get it wrong, and I think this is important, and I've done this when I've been doing some senior jobs where you're making really big decisions, is can you look yourself in the mirror when you're 80?
Yeah.
Because if you can't look at yourself in the mirror when you're 80, then you will always feel a hole inside you, and that's not good for your mental health.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because there's companies and corporations out there that, they don't want to deal with it, so they just turn it over to their human resources, the HR department, and then allow them to be the bad guy in the whole scenario. And either they take them and put them on a growth plan, or I've seen them where, they actually will bait people to make a mistake so that they can, push them out. And, it's absolutely discouraging to see that, because, we should be working towards, trying to build people up and build them towards success. And if they don't fit, then be honest about that conversation. And, I feel like you got to be honest about the conversation. Say, look, this is what we're trying to do. Your strengths are here, but we can't use those strengths in the area that we're at right now. And even offer suggestions. Say, I think your strengths would be more fitting in this organization, or, those types of things.
Yeah, I can give you 2 good examples. So Matthew Syed is a really fantastic writer. He's written a number of books. One of them is called Black Box Thinking. There's the other one, who's Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote a book called Blink, and they both talk about medical malpractice. And so doctors who have been honest about making an error, even if they've made an error in surgery, for example, have been honest and open with families, generally don't get sued, and the hospital trusts end up with less legal fees as a result. The ones who lie about it often end up having problems with becoming and maintaining their positions, but also billions and billions of dollars and pounds on legal suits. And moreover, the families who've been wronged will feel worse even when they've got the money. But the families who've been told the truth right up front, open, honest, and transparently, will go away more understanding of the complexity of the world that surgeon was dealing with at the time. And they've proven time and time again that if you take that approach, it saves money and you end up with better outcomes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's this mindset that's out there, and I'm not going to say that it's prevalent, but it's there, that people feel like a monetary reward for a mistake, overrides the mistake and the decisions that went with it. And that comes back down to intention as well. So
it does.
Yeah.
But I think as well, if you're doing the right thing every day, you're giving yourself great protection. So if there is a litigious position, you can just lay out exactly what happened without fear, and then what happens. But you know that you've done absolutely the best thing you can. And I've done that on operations where we've used kinetic activity, either dropping bombs myself, or firing stuff, or signing off on stuff. And also when I'm running training schools where, if people bump into each other, they tend to be killed. And I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. I always think if I can't explain it to the families of the people who've been killed, then I don't really care about the lawyer. I need to be able to explain it to the families, the decisions I've made and why, and therefore I can explain it to the lawyer, no problems. And what happens after that.
Yeah.
And that's a much better approach.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to, taking ownership, you take ownership whether of what you have done and what the consequences of that are, good, bad, or otherwise.
Yeah. And I like that phrase, good, bad, or otherwise. It's really true.
Yeah. Well, we're coming close to our time. It's gone by really, really quick. And, I've been absolutely just been anticipating this and looking forward to it because, I told you before the show started, my whole thing is I wanted to be a pilot for the longest time. And then, fate just did not push me that way. But do you have just a cool story you want to share with everybody, with all your experience and
all of them are self-depreciating most of the time. What would be appropriate for the approach? All right, I'll give you one. So I'm in Canada and we're doing operational low flying training, which means we're flying at 600 knots and 100 feet off the deck. Wow. And it's exactly what Top Gun 2 is all about. And we're doing all those high dive approaches and precision guided munition stuff. But we're working with a JTAC, a controller on the ground, who's guiding us into targets in the wilderness, and we're having to find those targets in real time. And working with a weapon system operator, we have to hit them, and it's a complicated business. And we're in a 4-ship, and I'm number 3 in the 4-ship, but I'm one of the most experienced people in that 4-ship. So we're doing the debrief afterwards, doing multiple target runs. So I've done 4 target runs. Everyone's done 4 target runs, trying to hit these targets. And the first group is a really young pair, really talented, a young pilot and a young weapon system operator. And where all their debriefs, they're running into the target, they're talking all the time, just talking all the time. And they're okay. They get near the targets. They do okay, but it's not brilliant. And the second group are a bit more experienced, but they're not very good. Together, they don't work really well. So even though they're doing the right things, they're just getting in each other's way the whole time. And they have okay results as well, but it's not fantastic. They're really working hard to do it. Yeah. And then I was flying with this guy called Simon. Let's call him Simon today. We've both got to a point where we have an unconscious competence. And that they talk about sports people getting into flow. We were literally doing all the procedures absolutely correctly, bang on time, all over, literally just not even thinking about it, all just flowing like beauty. Yeah. And we were just chatting about the weekend and sport. And we were going, and we did 4 times, direct hit, direct hit, direct hit, direct hit. And our cockpit recording just sounds like we're having fun. Because that's exactly what we're doing. Yeah. We're having fun. Yeah. And I think that was the thing I took away was just, I didn't even think about those things at the time. So getting out of your way is often a really good way. Yeah. It's not about your talent, it's about how you're working together. And me and Si were just working in this beautiful fusion. We call it synergy, where 1 + 1 = 3. Yeah. But the other one is you can end up with 1 + 1 = being a half, where the two of you are not as good as half a person. But that was a great feeling. What an amazing feeling to just flash around at low level. At what was probably about 10 miles a minute. 600 knots is probably about 800 miles an hour. Yeah. So it's about 8 or 9 statute miles a minute. That is fast. And right over the top of trees. That is pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah, that would be so awesome. I would love to be able to just get in the back of a cockpit and just enjoy the ride, and cool. Yeah. And so I've got a buddy of mine that lives down in Florida, and in the area that he's in, he sees the Blue Angels flying by all the time. So he always sends me recordings of them when they're flying by doing practice, or leaving out to go do a show somewhere. So have you seen the documentary on them? Yes, I have. Yeah. So that's a beautiful bit is when they're talking about visualization. So chair flying, and they're all sat in there and they're going all at the same time. Yeah. Absolutely brilliant. So we do chair flying and maintaining a bubble all the time. Yeah. And I've flown with the Red Arrows a few times, and they do extraordinary things just like the Blue Angels. It's just an amazing environment to be. But coming back to what you said about your approach, it's ordinary people doing extraordinary things because of the approach they take.
Awesome. So I'm going to be respectful of your time, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and sharing all your knowledge and wisdom and understanding that you've accumulated over the years and your experience. So tell people how to find you. What do you offer? What can you offer them? And go from there.
So if you just Google ACES Pegasus Coaching, then you'll find my website. I'm on X, I'm on Instagram on ACES Pegasus. There's a Facebook group called Maverick Thinking, where we ask people to think in a slightly more lateral way. Working with my co-director, Al Pepper, who's one of my weapons system operator buddies, who's a psychologist. If you do that, then you can get in touch on the website, subscribe to the website, and we can help your company or help you. You can look on Google as well. We're available on Google.
Yeah. Well, everybody, please reach out to him. He's got a wealth of knowledge, obviously very well read, and just a really, really, from our perspective, just a really cool guy. So
thank you. That's so kind. My son doesn't think that.
I kid.
He's like, yeah, Dad, you can't sing or dance, and I'm like, yeah, I can't.
Yeah, you're not a TikTok star, so yeah. No, our kids never think we're cool, but hopefully everybody else does. So
I work at it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, and we're going to wrap it up. And if you want to hang tight after we close up, we'll finish up with a couple things, and we will get wrapped up here.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And again, thank you for tuning in and watching our show again. And you're the ones that keep this thing going and allowing us to be able to continue to make more. And hopefully we've shared some things that have been able to help you in your journey as a leader or a business owner, or just as an individual to develop your own personal skills. Until next time, talk about your approach.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Approach. Please hit that like button and subscribe for the latest episodes. If you would like to be a guest or would like for Dr. McAllister to speak at your business or event, you can email him at info@drdavismcallister.com. You can also go to his website at drdavismcallister.com.